What's up, AP Psych? Welcome back. Today we are finishing up our discussion of memory with retrieval. We've talked about the intro to memory, the different phases, talked about encoding, storage. Today we hit retrieval. So just like this guy, when you're sitting there on a test and you're trying to remember information that you've stored in your brain, or you're pulling up old memories that you've experienced in your life so you can talk about them with your family or friends and have fun and go back and look back on things that have occurred. That's all due to retrieval. So retrieval, like we just mentioned, is all about getting information out of the memory store. It's there, but how do we get it out to be able to use it, right? So how do we get to it? Well, there's things that are called retrieval cues that allow our memory to pull certain things up or our brain to pull certain information out. And that's stimuli that help people get information from the long-term memory. You can think of these cues kind of like search terms. When you pull up your phone or you head to Google, you're like, oh, I need to figure out this information. You put in a few keywords and boom, Google provides you with all of these different options. You can think of retrieval cues like that for your brain. When certain things happen, your brain pulls up or makes all of these associations and says, here's all of the things that you've learned or you remember that are associated with that. Choose the one you think you want. So it kind of helps you find those stored memories. There are a few types of retrieval cues. We talked about a couple in the last few videos, but our memories are held in storage, like we mentioned, by a web of associations. And these associations are like anchors that help retrieve memory. So when we receive these cues, we pull up different memories and we choose the ones that we need or the ones that we associate with certain situations. Last time we talked about method of loci and how you can remember certain things based upon familiar locations. Another we talked about was peg word. And just to show you the kind of the power of some of these retrieval cues and memory techniques, I think I can remember this list from one of our previous videos. So one is bun, and I believe we associated lettuce with the bun because I remember seeing lettuce in between two buns. Two is shoe, and I believe we put a banana in the shoe to remember to get bananas at the store. Three is tree, and there was cheese up in the tree. And four is door, and there was a tomato on the door. So I just remember that entire list from like last week that I haven't even looked up since because I made this memory technique, this peg word. So these retrieval cues can be very powerful. However, they are only as good as the memory itself. So retrieval will depend upon the type of memory and how well you encoded or stored it, how much meaning you gave to it, and how much you were paying attention when you did encode that information. So retrieval cues are very powerful, but only as powerful as you make them. So a few types of retrieval. First, we have recognition. We mentioned this earlier in class, but in recognition, the person has to identify an item amongst other items. This is one of the easier types of retrieval. An example, a multiple choice test requires recognition, right? Or multiple choice questions. So if I asked you to name the capital of France, most of you could probably do it anyway, but if you looked here at your options, you'd almost certainly know it's Paris, right? So that's recognition, just seeing and identifying the correct thing amongst other potential options. In opposition to that, you have recall, and this is where the person must retrieve information using effort. This is a lot of effortful processing. There's no answer. The answer is not right in front of you like retrieval. And recall, you have to pull it out of your brain, which makes it much more effortful and much more difficult. So like a fill in the blank test requires this, or your FRQs, they all require this as well. So here's an example. For some of you, this might be pretty easy because you know it. Others, you might have to do a little thinking. What is the capital of Germany? No options to choose from. You just have to think through and effortfully process the potential cities in Germany that you know, and hopefully you come up with Berlin. Okay, so that's recall. We also have relearning, and in relearning, the individual shows how much time or effort is saved when you learn a material a second time. So this is kind of like rehearsal or distributed practice or the spacing effect. When you space information out and you come back to it, you learn it much faster and it is much more likely to stay in your memory. So let's say it took you 10 trials to remember this list. Okay. And then one day later, you came back and you relearned it, and it only took you 5 trials to memorize it. So what that tells us is that relearning can cut our learning time in half when we come back to these things and relearn them again and again and again. And relearning is that type of retrieval. It helps it be much more present in our minds and easier to retrieve because of the amount of time and effort we've put into learning it. Okay, so take a look at this image. Kind of scary. Yikes. Okay, so I'd like you to spell the word bear. How did you spell the word? Did you spell it B-E-A-R? But I didn't specify, did I? Why didn't you spell it B-A-R-E? Okay. What I just did to you with that image, I primed you. Okay? And priming is another retrieval cue. And it's a procedure of providing cues that stimulate memories without awareness of the connection between the cue and the retrieved memory. So you remembered how to spell bear, but you spelled the specific type of bear because I was priming your brain to spell it that way. Okay. For example, if I gave you the list of bread, juice, milk, what are you going to put in there? Versus towel, shower, shampoo, that becomes soap. But this one's soup, right? But it's the same exact situation, just different priming words around it, different context around it. So this is often referred to as memoryless memory because it's done without our conscious awareness, yet it does predispose us to interpret or recall information in a certain way. So we do this all the time in school. When I ask you questions, I'm priming you for specific content that we're going to discuss. I'm trying to get your brain in the right mode, those types of things. Okay, that's priming. Another retrieval cue is context effects. And this is interesting. When you put yourself back in the context where you first experienced something, that can prime your memory for retrieval and make your memory even more effective. So here's an example. They did a study. Scuba divers were presented with a list of words when they were underwater. And if they first learned the list underwater, they recalled more words when they were back underwater than when they did when they were on land. Conversely, when they learned the words on land, they recalled more when they were on land than when they were underwater, trying to remember the list. So you remember things when you're in the same environment better. You remember things better when you're in the same environment as when you learned them the first time. Okay. So if this is true, then how should you study for your next AP Psych test? And in what context? Well, most of our tests occur in school at your desk, right? You're probably watching this maybe at home somewhere in your living room, on your couch, in your bedroom, something like that. The more that you can closely match your learning to the place where you're going to have to retrieve it, the better it's going to be. The better you're going to remember and retrieve that information. So hopefully you can be encoding this information or taking it in your off block, in a desk somewhere, in a school environment, because that will aid in your retrieval. Another retrieval cue, déjà vu. Déjà vu means I've experienced this before, right? And we've all had that feeling of like, you stop and you're like, what? Is this a glitch in the matrix? Like, what happened? Have I done this before? And this is just cues from the current situation or the context around you that unconsciously trigger retrieval of an earlier similar experience. Okay, so you're kind of unconsciously experiencing something similar to what you have in the past, and it makes you feel like you've done it before, which you kind of have something similar to it. Okay, and that's that feeling of déjà vu. A couple more retrieval cues. So we have state-dependent memory, and this is what we learn / encode in one emotional or physical state, maybe more easily recalled when we are again in that same state during your attempted retrieval. So I know what you're thinking. This sounds similar to context-dependent memory. Context-dependent is the environment, the physical environment that you're in, okay? The things around you, right? The place that you are. In state-dependent memory, it's much more internal. It's your physical state or your emotional state. Okay? And what do those things mean? Okay, well, one great example of state-dependent memory is they tested some college students. They had them do learning activities when they were drunk and when they were sober. Okay? So they were in a different physical state than normal, right? So if they were sober at learning, their recall was much better than when they were drunk, right? However, if they were drunk at learning, their recall was much better when they were drunk again, because they were back in the same physical state that they had been when they learned the information. To go along with this, mood or emotion is just as powerful, right? This person, I can't remember what we were arguing about either. Let's keep yelling and maybe it'll come back to us. So if you're upset when you learn something or experience something and you can't remember what it was that you learned, but you get upset again and all of a sudden it comes back, that is part of the emotional state-dependent memory aspect. So this is very similar to mood congruent memory. It's our tendency to recall experiences that are consistent with our current mood. So if you are happy or in a good mood, you're more likely to recall or pull up happy or positive events that you've experienced. If you're in a bad mood, those will bring about sad or negative memories. So this is a little bit more about your current mood and how that makes you think about things, right? And kind of manifest itself. That's mood congruent memory. You're going to pull up those positive or negative memories based on your current mood. Whereas state dependent, when you took in information or learned something, you're more likely to be able to retrieve it if you're in that same state. Okay? So those are some more retrieval cues as well. And one last one, we have something called tip of the tongue phenomenon. It's our inability to recall a word or idea while knowing it is in your memory. Right, so this is kind of frustrating. But most common items on tip of the tongue are names and familiar objects that you're trying to retrieve and you just can't quite get to. So why does it happen? It's probably due to some type of interference during recall. It could be poor match between retrieval cues and the encoding of information. They might not just match up right. You might not be getting the correct retrieval cues to pull the information up. You may need some recognition help or something like that. So for example, can you name the 7 dwarves? Most of us probably can get 5 or 6 even, because many of them have to do with emotions and states of being. But we forget about Doc, right? You have dopey, sleepy, sneezy, happy, grumpy, bashful, Doc. Right? Or in class, when I had you try to remember those state capitals, many of you experienced this phenomenon of saying, I know what it is, I just can't quite get to it, right? It's in there, I just can't retrieve it for some reason, and I don't know why. Right? So this is retrieval. All the different retrieval cues are important to remember, write down, give some examples of, hopefully help you with your vocab. So take a second, think about those. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in class.